Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty fundamental, something I think we all kind of take for granted, but is super important: healthy bones.
Yeah, you really don't think about them until, until something goes wrong, right?
Exactly. And two of the biggest players in bone health, of course, are vitamin D and calcium. But we're not just going to talk about, drink your milk and get some sun. We're going deeper.
Much deeper. We're going to look at the science behind how your body actually gets and uses these nutrients.
Yeah. I mean, you've probably heard about getting vitamin D from sunlight versus popping a pill. And maybe you've wondered, what's the deal with ionized calcium? Like, what even is that?
Those are great questions, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
So to get there, we dug into some pretty fascinating research. We've got articles here on how sunlight and supplements provide vitamin D, the role of ionized calcium in bone health, and all the intricate ways our bodies handle it all. It's a lot more complex than you might think.
It really is. And the goal today is to walk away with a crystal clear understanding of how to really optimize your bone health. So we'll be looking at the most effective ways to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D and calcium, considering all the different angles.
Right, because everyone's different, and what works for one person might not be the best approach for another.
Exactly. One size fits all doesn't apply here. All right, so where should we start?
Well, let's kick things off with sunlight and vitamin D. It just seems like the most, intuitive way to get vitamin D, right? You're outside, the sun's shining, it feels good.
Yeah, it's like, how nature intended.
Totally. Our sources explain this really cool process. I'm always amazed by the body where UVB radiation from the sun hits your skin. And it basically transforms this compound in your skin called 7-dehydrocholesterol.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
Oh, I know, right?
7-dehydrocholesterol. It's a mouthful.
It is. Okay, so UVB radiation hits your skin and changes this 7-dehydrocholesterol first into pre-vitamin D3, and then that turns into vitamin D3, the kind our bodies use.
And here's the really cool part. You can't overdose on vitamin D just from being out in the sun. Your body has this awesome self-regulating system.
Really? So, even if I fell asleep on the beach for, hours.
You might get a sunburn, but you wouldn't get vitamin D toxicity. That's because once your body has enough vitamin D3, it basically puts the brakes on. It converts any extra pre-vitamin D3 into inactive compounds so you don't end up with too much.
Wow. So our bodies are, way smarter than we give them credit for.
All the time. And another thing about sunlight-produced vitamin D, the research shows it doesn't just flood your system all at once.
So it's not like an immediate jolt.
Nope. It binds to this protein called vitamin D binding protein, DBP for short, and then it's slowly released into your bloodstream over several hours.
Okay, so more like a slow and steady drip.
Exactly. Think of it like a time-release vitamin.
That's a great analogy, and I feel like there's always but when it comes to health stuff, it's not as simple as just, stepping outside for 5 minutes and bam, you're good on vitamin D, right?
Yeah, right. There are actually quite a few factors that affect how much vitamin D you make from sunlight.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Where you live is a big one. The further you are from the equator, the less direct sunlight you get, especially during winter.
So someone up in, Alaska is going to have a harder time than someone in Florida.
For sure. And even the time of day matters. Midday sun, when the sun's highest in the sky, has the most UVB.
Ah, that's why they call it prime time for tanning.
Exactly. But for vitamin D production, too. Then you've got your skin tone. The more melanin you have, the darker your skin, the longer you need to be in the sun to make the same amount of vitamin D as someone with lighter skin.
Interesting. So it's not really fair in a way.
Unfortunately not. And as if that wasn't enough, age plays a role too. As we get older, our skin just becomes less efficient at making vitamin D. It's kind of a bummer.
It is, but then there are the things we do, right? We wear sunscreen to protect our skin, which is important, but most sunscreens block UVB.
Right. And we wear clothes, and we spend a lot of time indoors. Even sitting by a window, the glass filters out UVB.
So it's kind of this complex equation, trying to balance getting enough sun for vitamin D, but also protecting your skin. It can be a little overwhelming.
I hear that. But the good news is, according to our sources, you don't need to bake in the sun for hours to get the benefits. Even short bursts of midday sun without sunscreen can really make a difference.
Okay, that's reassuring. And I've also read that sunlight might have other health benefits beyond vitamin D, like mood boosting and better sleep, although that's not really the focus of our deep dive today.
Yeah, there's definitely more to the story, but we're going to stick to vitamin D and calcium for now.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the sunlight route. Now let's talk about the other way to get vitamin D, taking a supplement. And as our research points out, it's a completely different process.
Right, it is. When you take a vitamin D supplement, it gets absorbed through your gut. And apparently, having some fat in your meal can actually help with absorption.
Oh, interesting. So maybe take it with a meal that has some healthy fats.
Could be a good strategy. And once it's absorbed, it enters your bloodstream much faster than the vitamin D made from sunlight.
So no slow drip here. It's like a quicker hit of vitamin D.
Pretty much. But just like with sunlight, there are factors that affect how well your body utilizes oral vitamin D.
Okay, like what?
Well, your gut health plays a role. If your gut's not in tip-top shape, you might not absorb nutrients as efficiently. What you eat also matters, as we just discussed with the fats. And even the form of the supplement makes a
What
difference.
form?
Yeah, like whether it's vitamin D2 or D3, most of the research suggests that D3 is generally better at boosting your vitamin D levels, specifically the 25-OHD form, which is what doctors usually test for.
Okay, good to know. And then there's dosage, of course, right? Like you need to make sure you're taking the right amount.
Absolutely, and that's where it gets a little tricky. With sunlight, your body has that built-in mechanism to prevent you from getting too much vitamin D. But with supplements, you can definitely overdo it.
Yikes. So you got to be careful. Too much can lead to that hypercalcemia thing you mentioned earlier, right?
Exactly. That's why it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor before starting any new supplement, especially vitamin D.
Good advice. But the upside of oral vitamin D, though, is that it's really convenient. You don't have to worry about the weather or your skin tone or how much time you can spend outside. It's like a guaranteed dose, no matter what.
It really is. It kind of levels the playing field for people who might not be able to get enough vitamin D naturally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, shifting gears a bit, we've talked about getting vitamin D from sunlight and supplements, but they both ultimately need to be converted into the active form of vitamin D, which is called calcitriol, right?
That's right. Both paths lead to the same destination, but they take different routes to get there.
And our sources point out that both sunlight and oral vitamin D eventually end up as calcitriol after going through these two processing steps, first in the liver and then in the kidneys. It's fascinating how our bodies handle all this.
It really is amazing. But here's where the timing gets interesting. Oral vitamin D tends to give you a faster increase in those 25-OHD levels, the storage form of vitamin D, especially if you're not getting much sun.
So if you need a quick boost, supplements might be the way to go.
It could be, yeah. But the vitamin D you make from sunlight, remember that slow drip we talked about? That might actually provide a more sustained release of calcitriol over time.
Okay, so both methods have their pros and cons. It really depends on the individual, right? Like their lifestyle, their sun exposure, their health needs.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for you.
All right, well, let's move on to the other crucial piece of the bone health puzzle, calcium. But specifically, this ionized calcium that we mentioned earlier, I have to admit, I'm a little fuzzy on what exactly that is.
I think a lot of people are. It's not as commonly talked about as, say, just getting enough calcium.
Yeah. So our sources explain that ionized calcium is like the free agent of calcium in our blood. It's not bound to anything, so it's the form that's actually biologically active.
Right, it's the calcium that's ready to go to work. And it does a lot of important jobs to keep our bones strong and healthy.
Like what, exactly?
Well, for one, it's a key structural component of bone itself. It helps form these crystals called hydroxyapatite, which give bone its strength and structure.
Ah, so it's literally part of the building blocks of bone.
It is. And it's also essential for that ongoing process of bone remodeling. You
Yeah.
know how our bodies are constantly breaking down old bone and building up new bone?
Yeah, I've heard about that. It's like our bones are always under construction.
Exactly. And that involves these specialized cells, osteoblasts, which build bone, and osteoclasts, which break down bone.
Wow, that's amazing. So ionized calcium is involved in all of that.
It is. And probably the most important role of ionized calcium is that having enough of it circulating in our blood prevents our bodies from having to pull calcium from our bones.
Oh, okay, so like it helps prevent bone loss.
Exactly, because when the levels of ionized calcium in your blood dip too low, your body thinks, emergency, we need calcium. And it'll start taking it from wherever it can, which unfortunately often means your bones.
That makes sense. So having enough ionized calcium in our blood is like having enough reserves on hand so our body doesn't have to raid our bones.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about ionized calcium doing its own thing. There's these indirect ways it helps too.
Indirect.
Yeah, like remember how we talked about vitamin D being important for calcium absorption? Well, that applies here too. You could be eating all the calcium-rich foods in the world, but without enough vitamin D, your body won't be able to use that calcium effectively.
Right. So vitamin D is like the key that unlocks the door for calcium to get in.
Perfect analogy. And then there's this hormone called parathyroid hormone, or PTH for short.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It has something to do with calcium, right?
It does. When your ionized calcium levels get too low, PTH gets released, and it basically tells your body to start breaking down bone to free up more calcium.
So it's like PTH is trying to compensate for those low calcium levels by sacrificing our bones.
It's a survival mechanism, but not a good one in the long run. That's why getting enough absorbable calcium consistently is so important. It helps keep PTH in check and protect your bones.
Makes sense. And I remember our sources mentioning that testing specifically for ionized calcium levels can be really useful in certain situations.
Right, because sometimes the total calcium level in your blood might not give you the whole picture. Like if you have a condition that affects the amount of protein in your blood, or if you're critically ill, or even if you've just had major surgery or a blood transfusion.
So in those cases, looking at ionized calcium can be more accurate.
Exactly. It gives you a more precise measure of the calcium that's actually doing its job.
Okay, got it. So we know ionized calcium is crucial for strong bones, and the best way to get calcium is through our diet, right? Like dairy products, leafy green vegetables, and fortified foods.
Ideally, yes, those are the best sources.
But what about supplements? Those are an option too, right? And I noticed our sources talked about different forms of calcium supplements, like calcium carbonate and calcium citrate.
Yeah, and they have slightly different properties when it comes to absorption. Calcium carbonate is usually cheaper, but it needs stomach acid to dissolve properly. So if you have low stomach acid, which is more common as you get older, or if you take medications that reduce stomach acid, you might not absorb it as well.
So what's the alternative?
Calcium citrate. It's gentler on the stomach and doesn't need as much acid to dissolve. And there was a really interesting tidbit in our research. Calcium carbonate powder might actually be absorbed better than citrate tablets.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
But regardless of which form you choose, the bottom line is getting enough absorbable calcium, and that's what matters most for maintaining those healthy ionized calcium levels.
Okay, I'm following you. So to recap, we need vitamin D to absorb calcium, and ionized calcium is the active form our bones need. But how does all of this actually play out in the real world? Like, how does it translate into having healthy bones?
Well, let's paint a picture. Imagine you're taking a brisk walk outside on a sunny day.
Sounds lovely.
Right. So that sunshine is helping your body produce vitamin D. That vitamin D then helps your body absorb calcium from the delicious calcium-rich lunch you're about to eat.
I'm picturing a big salad with some grilled salmon and a glass of milk.
Perfect. So that calcium, in its ionized form, is going to contribute to building and maintaining strong bones. And bonus points because the walking itself is a weight-bearing exercise, which stimulates bone growth and makes your bones stronger.
So it's like a win-win-win situation. You're getting vitamin D, you're absorbing calcium, and you're actively strengthening your bones all at the same time.
Exactly. It's a beautiful system when it's working properly.
It really is.
Yeah.
But of course, there are other things that can affect ionized calcium and bone health beyond just vitamin D and that parathyroid hormone, right?
Oh, absolutely. Our sources go into quite a bit of detail about that. For instance, kidney disease can really throw a wrench in the works. It affects how vitamin D is activated and how phosphate is regulated, both of which impact calcium balance.
Okay, that's definitely something to be aware of.
Huh?
What about liver disease? Does that play a role?
It can. The liver produces proteins that help transport calcium in the blood, so liver problems can disrupt those processes.
And then there are those conditions that affect how well you absorb nutrients, which can mess with both calcium and vitamin D. And I imagine serious illnesses, like certain cancers, could have an impact as well.
Definitely. Severe infections, major trauma, even things like pancreatitis, they can all lead to imbalances in calcium and other electrolytes.
It's a good reminder that bone health is really tied to our overall health. Everything's connected.
It really is. And let's not forget about just plain old aging. As we get older, it's natural for our bodies to become less efficient at making vitamin D and absorbing calcium. Plus, kidney function often declines, and we might have higher levels of PTH. It's just part of the aging process, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's not like we're powerless against it, right?
Not at all. There are things we can do to support our bone health as we age. But we also have to remember that some medications can interfere with calcium and bone metabolism.
Like which ones?
Certain diuretics, for example, which are often used to treat high blood pressure, corticosteroids, which are powerful anti-inflammatory drugs, and even some common heartburn medications like proton pump
Huh?
inhibitors.
So it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor about potential side effects of any medications you're taking.
Absolutely. Now, here's something that really stood out to me in the research. When our ionized calcium levels drop, even just a little, our bodies have a very clear hierarchy of what gets priority.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, maintaining calcium levels for things like nerve function and muscle function, including your heart, those are top priority. Your body will do whatever it takes to make sure those systems have enough calcium to work properly.
Right, because those are essential functions.
Exactly. So, in the short term, if you don't have enough calcium coming in, your body will actually pull it from your bones to keep those vital functions running smoothly.
Wow. So it's like our bones are the backup supply.
Unfortunately, that's exactly what it is. It's a survival mechanism, but it can obviously have some long-term consequences for bone health.
Makes sense. That's why getting enough calcium consistently is so important.
It is, and it's not just about calcium and vitamin D either. The research also highlighted some other dietary factors that can influence ionized calcium and bone health.
Like what?
Well, phosphorus is a big one. It has a kind of inverse relationship with calcium. So if you eat a lot of phosphorus, you need to make sure you're getting enough calcium to balance it out.
Okay, good to know. What about magnesium?
Magnesium is also super important. It plays a role in PTH secretion, which we talked about earlier, and in vitamin D metabolism.
Got it. And I've also heard that too much sodium can be bad for your bones. Is that true?
It can be, yeah. High sodium intake increases the amount of calcium you lose through your urine.
So watching your salt intake is good for your bones too.
It seems so. And while protein is important for overall health and bone strength, getting too much protein might increase calcium excretion in some people too.
So as with most things in nutrition, it's all about balance.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now let's go back to those ionized calcium tests for a minute. Our sources explain that doctors will often order this test in situations where the total calcium level might not be telling the whole story.
Right, we touched on that earlier.
Yeah, so for example, if someone is critically ill or if their albumin levels are low, the ionized calcium test can give a more accurate picture of what's really going on.
Because it's measuring the free active form of calcium.
Exactly. And it can also be really helpful when there's a discrepancy between the total calcium results and the patient's symptoms.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, earlier we talked about how stomach acid affects the absorption of different forms of calcium supplements.
Right, how calcium carbonate needs stomach acid to break down, while calcium citrate is more easily absorbed even with low stomach acid.
So are there any other tips for getting the most out of the calcium we eat?
Well, our sources had some great advice on that. One simple strategy is to always take your calcium supplements with food.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And as we already mentioned, make sure you're getting enough vitamin D. It really is the key. And interestingly, they suggest being mindful of things like phytic acid and oxalic acid, which are found in some plant-based foods like beans, spinach, and
Oh,
almonds.
yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah,
They can interfere with mineral absorption, right?
it can. They bind to calcium. So if you eat large amounts of those foods at the same time as calcium-rich foods, you might not absorb as much calcium.
So timing matters.
It does. Calcium carbonate, as we discussed, is usually taken with meals, but calcium citrate is a little more flexible. You can take it with or without food, and spreading out your calcium intake throughout the day is probably better than trying to get it all in one sitting.
Because your body can only absorb so much at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Smaller, more frequent doses seem to be more effective. And speaking of getting enough calcium, we should also talk about what can happen if you get too much. Because yes, there can be too much of a good thing.
Right, that's always a concern with supplements. What did our sources say about that?
Well, getting too much calcium can cause some unpleasant side effects, like constipation. And for some people, it can increase their risk of developing kidney stones.
Yikes. Anything else?
There's also some evidence that high calcium intake might interfere with the absorption of other important minerals, like iron and zinc. And there's been some debate about a possible link between high calcium intake and cardiovascular problems, although the research isn't conclusive.
Okay, so it's definitely wise to stick within the recommended guidelines and not go overboard.
Definitely. Moderation is key, as with most things in nutrition. Finally, it's important to remember that calcium needs can vary quite a bit depending on who you are.
Right, we're not all the same.
Not even close. Kids and teenagers need more calcium because their bones are still growing. And as we get older, even though our bones aren't growing anymore, getting enough calcium becomes even more crucial because our absorption tends to decrease.
And what about pregnant and breastfeeding women?
They have increased calcium needs too, both for themselves and for their babies.
Makes sense. And I imagine genetics can also play a role in how our bodies handle calcium.
Oh, absolutely. There are genetic factors that can influence how we absorb calcium, how we regulate calcium levels, and even our susceptibility to certain bone disorders. And as we discussed earlier, kidney disease can have a major impact on calcium and bone metabolism.
So it's not really a one-size-fits-all situation at all.
Not at all. What one person needs might be completely different for someone else. Their age, their lifestyle, their health history, their genetics, it all plays a role.
And that's why it's so important to talk to your doctor or a registered dietitian to figure out what's right for you.
Exactly. They can help you assess your individual needs and make sure you're getting the right amount of calcium and vitamin D.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive today? Well, the sunlight is a great way to get vitamin D, but how well it works really depends on a lot of individual factors.
Right, like where you live, the time of year, your skin tone, and even how much time you spend outdoors.
Exactly. And if you can't get enough sunlight, taking a vitamin D supplement is a reliable backup. But talk to your doctor to make sure you're taking the right dose.
Absolutely. And don't forget about ionized calcium, the active form that's essential for bone health. Its levels are influenced by everything from vitamin D and what we eat to how well our kidneys are working and even our genetics.
It's amazing how complex it all is.
It is, but the good news is that we can take steps to support our bone health.
It's like getting some sensible sun exposure when possible, eating a balanced diet with plenty of calcium-rich foods, and considering supplements if needed.
And being proactive about overall health, managing any underlying conditions, and talking to your doctor about any medications you're taking, it's all part of a holistic approach to healthy bones.
Couldn't agree more. All right, folks, that's our deep dive on vitamin D, ionized calcium, and the amazing world of bone health. Hopefully you've learned something new and maybe you're even feeling a little bit more empowered to take charge of your bone health.
That's what we hope for.
I know I am. Now, I'm curious what's got you thinking about your own vitamin D and calcium levels after all of this. It might be a good time to bring it up with your doctor at your next checkup.
It's never a bad idea to have that conversation.
All right, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of health and wellness.
See you then.